Hey guys, check this out. This is our 18th episode building this kit bash tank of partially Motto, partially Tigan, partially Doug parts into an all-metal tank. Today we're going to have Landon doing the entire episode for us. Finally got him back from grad school and he pulled out the airbrush and did these tracks here and also the bottom hull section. Let's go to it. We are back in the Commander's Cupola. Hi, this is Doug for the Full Earth Workshop, working on our wonderful Tiger 1 RC tank. Landon is here too, armed only with an airbrush and a thermos of coffee. He'll be painting the tracks and the road wheels today. We are proudly featuring parts from Hanwha, from RC Tank Legion Shop, from Motto, from Clark, and from Tigan Tanks. Landon's ready to paint.
Boy, he'll chipping medium. We're not going to chip this area here as much. That's mostly just going to be under the tracks and stuff, so you're not really going to see it. Using the Neo. Pretty good airbrush. $60 from Hobby Lobby. And this stuff's pretty thick, so I thin it down. If you get a bunch of these handy dandy pipettes from Hobby Lobby, they're really useful. Get some water, which I've got a little cup here. You just pour that in there to mix it. You can even use the pipette to stir it if you need to. And this will just kind of make it so it is a little bit easier to spray out. This stuff's good, this chipping fluid, but it's very, very thick, so it's harder to airbrush. Yeah, see how that was pretty explosive. And you can spray this stuff on pretty thick, and it levels itself out pretty well. So you want it to be pretty thick so that it will chip later on. Sometimes you can not spray enough on there and you don't get the reaction that you want. For the sprockets and stuff, I'm mostly going to spray on the front end, maybe a little bit on the rear, so that you can see it. I'll spray low on here just in case if you wanted to do that. Thankfully, we're coming to the end of this. We can start getting some of this final color in here. I'm spraying it on pretty thick, so it dries pretty evenly, so it looks like it's gonna slop everywhere, but it's actually okay. So we're mostly, once we get this done, we're mostly done with the camouflage for this Tiger. What we're gonna have to do is 131. The one in Bovington, from their restoration, it has a secondary color. It's not all just flat tan. It actually has a second tone, which is kind of a greenish tan color. And so we're gonna have to kind of formulate that color. What'll be cool about having a multicolor camouflage is we can do some chipping on the second color as well to see the tan underneath. Probably won't be too much chipping, but a little more interesting. And I'm being pretty generous with this layer. Doesn't really matter how much. From my past experience with this tank, the chipping fluid doesn't tend to work as intended. It's supposed to work where you just put your brush on there with water and it will just chip immediately. But this stuff, it doesn't chip that easily. You have to really kind of work at it with tools to make the chips. But I actually prefer that because it's more controllable. And truthfully, you don't have to do the chipping fluid. You could just paint the chips yourself. But I find it more difficult to have chips that look realistic doing it that way. That's just me. There's a guy named Night Shift on YouTube, and he is a master modeler. He's far better than I am at doing the stuff by hand. And man, his chipping is truly phenomenal. He can just do it and just have these amazing chips. So I usually, before, you know, I chipped it and I would let it sit for a day, but I don't think we need to do that. I think once it's pretty much dried to the touch, we could probably just get going. Which it'll take a few moments, but you can see this one's already kind of drying. So we'll let these dry. That's going to be really interesting. It's called watching paint dry. And then once that's done, we can start painting the camouflage. For the camouflage itself, we're going to be using these Tamiya paints. XF60 dark yellow, and we're going to mix it with Deck Tan XF55. They have multiple dark yellow colors now, but really both of them are very yellow. You can see from the bottom, very yellow. We don't really think that the German tanks looked that yellow. And when you're in scale, you tend to want to lighten the color quite a bit. So maybe if it was full size, that'd probably look fine. But this isn't full size, it's 1/16 scale. So if you lighten it up with the lighter color, it'll make it look a little bit more realistic. So boom, look at these Taigen tracks, freaking awesome. Really big and bulky and really heavy duty. The funny thing about these Taigen tracks is they're cheaper than Fruhl model tracks that you can get for 135 scale tanks, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, this is probably 5 times the amount of metal, and it's cheaper. So for the tracks, I'm gonna do base coat with this XF72 brown, and this will just kind of make them look a little dirty. Dad was saying he wanted them to have some rust, but truthfully, tracks that are in the field don't have a lot of rust on them because the action of the tracks, and you actually don't get a lot of that when something's in the field. Hopefully you can see, that's about the lip that I've thinned the paint to. When it comes in the bottle, it's a little bit lower the line of the paint, and so I fill it up to the lip of the screw, and it tends to be enough thinner for it to work. Once you put some extra thinner in there, it's probably a good practice to go ahead and just shake up the bottle, make sure it's all, you know, really well thinned out. Boom, take that out and pour it into the hopper. Simple as that. Now, one thing that some people really worry about is the paint coming off on the side here, because when you put the screw cap back on, the paint will dry and it makes it really difficult to get the cap off. But typically it's okay. Typically it's not that big of a deal. I'm just going in and I'm just going to kind of dust it. This is basically a dust layer. I'm not too worried about covering up the steel kind of texture you have here to make it look like scratched up, because when we get this RC tank rolling, it's going to scratch up the paint anyway. So really any paint I put on here is kind of going to be not long for this world, so I'm not going to spend too much time. Why simulate mud when you're going to put the tank in mud? I mean, it's going to simulate mud itself by going through mud. I mean, why would I put tank? This is not like a 135 scale model where I've got to simulate everything with paint or pastels as pigments, you know. I can just go in and have the tank go through mud, you know, the real thing. This dusting will kind of tone down the black though, and I think make it look a little more realistic. And I'm being pretty generous with this. Mixing the paint is kind of hard to show on camera because it's kind of a delicate process of balancing it in the hopper. So it's kind of fun finally getting this thing done. Sorry it's been so long, you guys. You guys have been very patient with this project. But I've been in school, and man, you know, school comes first. So I've got these rubber paint brushes that have a rubber tip. And what's cool about them is that I use them for mixing a lot because you can just rub the paint off and it takes the paint right off of it. See, that looks a little too yellow to me, so what I'm gonna pour some of it into the hopper. I don't really have a ratio of how I mix these. I mostly just kind of do it by eye. So if you guys are wondering how much of these two paints I'm mixing, I don't know myself. Okay, so you can kind of see in the camera some of the chipping fluid still drying on top here. So what we're gonna do, we're just gonna cover this area. This doesn't matter as much if the chipping fluid is dry or not, because this is a spot you're not going to see. You know, if I'm a model maker and I'm going to be taking photos of every direction of my model, you want everything to be covered, but this is an RC tank. You know, this is going to be experiencing some of the real stuff. Like, it's going to be going through mud, going through dirt, and so, you know, this area in particular with the tracks, where the tracks are going to be encountering the paint, it's probably going to really ding up stuff. So being too careful with this is really not something you're going to be doing, because it's going to be wasting your time. But it's mostly dry, so it's alright. Just go ahead and start painting this stuff up. What's nice about this tan color is it really covers very well. You have to spend a lot of paint for it to cover things for some reason. I don't know why that is, but that's been my experience with this tank. I don't really work in 1/16 scale. Like I said, I usually work 135, even 172 tanks. So I'm much more used to things not needing so much paint. So it's kind of shocking every time I work on this thing. It's one thing about painting 3D objects is, man, you really got to turn them around quite a bit. Make sure you're getting every angle, especially wheels. You think you've gotten everything, and then you realize, oh man, when you turn it around, you haven't gotten everything. So you really got to focus on that. You're like, man, am I really covering everything? What I think is really cool about doing these paint jobs, though, is it's not like painting a car. You don't have to have it perfect, because, you know, cars, you pretty much paint them and they look perfect for most of the time they're alive out on the streets. But for tanks, especially World War II tanks, from what I understand, these tanks were painted in a gray color first and then repainted yellow when they went out to North Africa. North Africa is where 131 was captured by the British. That's why it's still alive today, where you can see it at Bovington. So the idea is that this was painted gray first and repainted tan. And since it was repainted tan, it's okay to have it where it's not a perfectly even coat of paint. One thing with models is if you have a perfectly even coat of paint, it doesn't make them very interesting to look at. I don't know why that is. It's just something to do with the human eye. You like to see variation. Everyone does. And having everything just flat is boring. It makes it look like a toy. It's kind of sloppy painting if you think about it, but it's actually more interesting to see. I don't know why that is. It's probably Gestalt principles playing into things. If you've noticed, this is actually a more yellow color than the top portion of the tank. The reason why I'm doing that is I'm trying to simulate shadows. So one thing that's interesting about scale objects, things that are like models like these, is, you know, light on larger objects, when something's larger, it has the ability to cast shadows, right? Smaller objects, you know, they cast shadows as well, but shadow in scale looks different from shadow in full size. So what modelers try to do is simulate what a full-size object would look like. And what that means is the color might be different from the lower hole to the upper hole. If you're trying to make something small look big, you want to make the upper hole look a little bit lighter than the lower hole. So it looks like, you know, there's more light hitting the upper hole than the lower hole. It doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it, because it's not technically realistic, but this isn't about realism. It's about tricking the eye. It's about making something that looks small, that is small, look big.
Episode 19's already in the film cans, getting ready for editing, so make sure you do your part. You like and subscribe this video, because the next one is coming very soon on the Full Earth Workshop. We'll see you later.